Welcome back to Two Keto Dudes. This is Carl Franklin from Connecticut in the United States, and in February 2016, I put myself on a ketogenic diet to take control of my metabolism. In just 2.5 months, I managed to reverse all my markers of type 2 diabetes with diet alone. As of now, I'm 80 pounds lighter with no signs of diabetes or heart disease.
Hi, I'm Richard Morris in Canberra, Australia, and I've been on a ketogenic diet since April of 2014 when I read a book by a Professor Stephen Finney called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living.
Yeah.
When I started, I was very sick with complications from type 2 diabetes, and within 6 months of starting a ketogenic diet, all of my biomarkers of disease had disappeared. I've lost about 100 pounds. I've completely turned my health around.
And this show is a document of our experiences thriving for years in nutritional ketosis.
And reversing diabetes.
Yeah, and hopefully that might help a few people who are curious about this kind of dietary hacking.
Yeah, we're not doctors. We don't want to give any medical advice, but we are keen to share our own experiences. We're actually both software developers, so we're not afraid of a little technical detail, are we, Carl?
No.
We've done some research into our own deranged metabolisms and the science behind them, and we share studies that we found in the show notes.
And you'll probably work out pretty quickly that we're both foodies. We love to cook, and we love to eat. In every episode, we both share a keto recipe that's not bad.
Yep.
It's not bad. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start podcast number 141, the grandfather of the ketogenic diet, Professor Stephen Finney.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
So, Richard, do we have any apologies or corrections from last week's show?
Yeah, that was show 140, Low Carb Sydney with Dr. Paul Mason.
Yeah.
I think Paul got everything right. We probably didn't, so you know how it goes.
But nobody's called us out on it yet.
Yeah, they haven't. If you heard anything you didn't like, let us know. Dudes at 2ketodudes.com.
Right. So let's revisit what a ketogenic diet is.
Sure. It's a ketogenic diet is one that puts you into a state of ketosis where you burn fat for energy rather than glucose.
Yes.
And the easiest way to do that is just don't give your body any glucose to burn and it will be forced to burn fat. And the easiest way to do that, 20 grams or less of carbohydrates. Our guest who invented nutritional ketosis says below 50, but some people will need to go to 20. Moderate protein, we use between 1 and 1.5 grams per kilogram of lean body mass. We get all of our energy from fat.
Yep.
And, if you're just starting, listen to our Starting Keto show at start.2keto.com.
Well, buddy, how was your week?
It was pretty stressful, actually. I've just finished my biology exam, and I think I aced it, actually. I think I did pretty well. It was a 3-hour exam, and at the 2-hour mark, I was done, and I stood up, and I think I was the first or second to leave, and either I aced it or I have no idea what I'm doing. So we shall see in my exam results. Also, I've started Carnovember, which is a month of eating only meat, salt, and water. I'm also eating a little bit of dairy. I'm eating eggs, although I haven't eaten any eggs so far in the month. And I don't think that mushrooms qualify as a plant. I think fungi fungi are herbivores. They eat lignin from trees.
That's right. Fungus is classified as neither animal nor vegetable, right?
Well, it's definitely not vegetable, so I'm gonna count it. Right. But I haven't eaten any mushrooms yet. I may not eat mushrooms. I said that with when I went over lacto vegetarian. I was going to eat fish, but I only had fish really sort of 2 days in the entire month. So anyway, that's carnivore this month, and there's a whole bunch of people joining us for carnivore. And then also I'm getting ready for Low Carb Sydney. That's on this Saturday, the 10th of November. Mm-hmm. We'll put a link in the show notes, but that's a low carb event in Sydney.
Yeah, very good.
Which I'm emceeing at. So that's my week. How was yours?
Pretty good. I'm also starting Carnovember, but I'm doing it a little differently. I guess I'm going to call it Carnovember or Carl November. I don't know. Whatever.
Carlvember.
Yeah, Carlvember. So I'm eating only animal products with the exception of garlic and herbs. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to have, cream, heavy cream. I'm going to have butter. I'm going to have eggs. I haven't, although I just started yesterday, I haven't had any eggs yet, but, and I'm allowing myself a little garlic for flavor and herbs. So no veggies to speak of, but I hope that will give me the same effect. Hoping.
Yeah.
Also, I've been editing some of the videos from Low Carb Houston. And
that was a pretty quick turnaround.
Well, yeah, the system that we're using is pretty sophisticated and it's fairly new. It allows us to stream, and as we're streaming, we're also recording, and we're switching the cameras live. And as we do that, the recording gets those edits as well. So we have 2 cameras plus the slides, and we can swap back and forth between them. We can go up to 3 cameras, but I only brought 2 with me. And then as soon as the stream is over, that entire stream is a YouTube video, and it's all edited.
Nice.
Now, it's not perfect. It doesn't have perfect audio levels or quality, and, the camera colors need to be fixed a bit. The video coloration needs to be fixed.
That's post-production.
Yeah, so a little post-production. But here's what we're doing, folks. We've announced the date for KetoFest 2019.
Sure have.
It's officially up there at ketofest.com. It's the weekend of July 20th, 2019.
Yeah, it's going to be the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong's Great Leap for Mankind.
That's right.
So I'm not sure what the theme is going to be because, the first KetoFest theme was Pay It Forward, and the second one was Expand Your Community.
Yeah.
This one, I don't know what it's going to be. We might have a riff on the idea of Michael Collins, who orbited the moon, not knowing whether he was going back by himself or with 2 guys and some moon rocks. So
interesting.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We're gonna come up with a really good theme, but
we'll do a Joseph Campbell thing on a hero's journey, maybe.
I like that.
We have a lot of time to think about that.
We have a lot of stuff.
But one thing I want to mention is that there's a forum at ketofest.com where you can, put in your name and email address and just sign up to be notified when the Kickstarter goes live. Now, we have a tentative date for the Kickstarter to go live. That's going to be February 18th. And every week between now and then, we are going to release a KetoFest video, KetoFest 2018 video.
Yeah.
Right? And a Low Carb Houston video. KetoFest videos will come out with our shows on Monday, and the Low Carb Houston video will come out on Thursday.
Nice.
And we are releasing one today from KetoFest.
And what video are we releasing today, Carl?
So we're releasing Eric Westman's video.
Ah, nice. Yeah.
And I think it was called something like, "Do we really need grass-fed meat?"
Well, true. I know people who've done a ketogenic diet, reverse their diabetes, eating McDonald's. So,
right.
Yeah. It's all very well and good to eat real food, and you and I, we love cooking, and we like using great ingredients. But if you can only afford to eat McDonald's, you can reverse diabetes.
Yep, you sure can. The other thing is my documentary / series that I'm working on, getting ready.
Keto Fixer.
I'm getting ready. Yeah. It's called The Keto Fixer. And the 2 guys that I'm following are doing great. Ron and Dave are their names, and they're both absolutely crushing it. And I was approached by a friend of mine who's really heavy and really sick, and he wants to do it, and I'm thinking I'm going to make him the sole subject of the documentary. The guys that I'm doing right now, I'm going to use in a trailer. And I might actually take their stories and make them separate videos. But I think that this one guy is going to have a really dramatic success. I'm hoping anyway. I have no reason to doubt that he's going to just shred it. But it's going to be a dramatic thing if it happens.
Cool.
Yep.
Well, I'm actually working on a video series myself. As soon as my exams are done, I'm going to do some videos debunking bad science journalism.
I love it.
So, all these articles about how ketogenic diets will cause you to live less long, and how people, diabetics, can reverse their diabetes on a vegan diet.
Right.
I'm going to drill into the science. So that brings us to the topic of projects and how we get funded, and everything that we've done, whether it be Keto Fest or the ketogenic forums or this podcast or any of the other podcasts we've done, have all been listener funded. They've all been supported by listeners, and some of our listeners have got deep pockets, and they've helped us quite well. And some of our listeners, have small amounts every month. Somebody reverses their diabetes all the time, on a ketogenic diet, and people are very grateful. And we would just like to thank everybody who's done that for us, because that's enabled us to do what we do.
Yes, and up till now, we've been able to afford it because of some of our deeper pocket contributors. But that is changing, and we're going to need to rely more on our Patreon account to fund these things that we're doing. And that's where you come in. If you're not already a Patreon, please go to patreon.2keto.com and help us, because we're doing this as a hobby right now. And I would prefer not to have to go get a full-time programmer job to pay my mortgage. And I would prefer to keep doing 2 Keto Dudes and Keto Women, Keto Families, and Keto Kids for all of you guys for years and years to come. So please help us do that by going to patreon.2keto.com and making a pledge. All right, enough of that. Let's give away some swag.
Sure. Every show we pick a lucky winner at random from the members of the 2 Keto Dudes fan club.
Yep, and today we're giving away a treasure trove of stuff from vendors we like, all of which you can find at fanclub.2keto.com.
We also need to mention a caveat. Most of our vendors can only ship inside the United States.
That's right. However, if we happen to pick someone outside the U.S., we will find something to send you, but it probably won't be all of the stuff in the treasure trove.
So who's our winner this week?
Today's winner is Stephanie Pettinella.
Congratulations, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Let's tell everybody what Stephanie's won.
Sure. Well, the first thing we're giving away is a 2 Keto Dudes coffee mug that says, "Keep calm and keto on." And by the way, it has our mugs on it.
It does. We're also giving away a signed copy of Lies, My Doctor Told Me by Dr. Ken Berry, online at lies.2keto.com.
And a bottle of Stevia Sweet barbecue sauce, developed by a barbecue restaurant owner who plans to change the restaurant industry forever. Only 2 carbs per serving, online at steviasweetbbq.com.
And a cheese-making kit from Wine and Way. Pam Zorn gave everybody at Keto Fest a kit so they can make their own fresh mozzarella. That's available online at wineandwhey.com. That's wineandwhey.com.
And a 6-ounce cup of beef bone broth concentrate from Birthright Nutrition. Just add water, heat, stir, sip, and enjoy. Jam-packed with good stuff. More at birthrightnutrition.com.
We're also giving away a bottle of Remag Magnesium Solution developed by Dr. Carolyn Dean, along with a copy of her protocol and the Keto and Magnesium Manifesto online at magmiracle.com.
And we're also giving away a big bottle of fasting drops from Keto Chow. It's a well-formulated blend of electrolytes, and you just drop a little in your water, and fasting is a breeze. Online at fastingdrops.2keto.com.
And 2 bottles of Sated, 1 chocolate, 1 vanilla, online at sated.2keto.com.
And from Keto & Co., a sampler 6-pack, a bag of brownies, 4 bags of different flavored cauliflower rices, and a bag of flatbread, online at ketoand.co.
And finally, a bag of everything bagels from Fox Hill Kitchens, made with yeast, but no wheat or gluten, online at bread.2keto.com.
And if you don't want to wait to win some swag, you can buy all sorts of it online at gear.2keto.com.
I think it's time for a little segment we call...
Short and sweet.
What you got, Carl?
All right, well, we got a new review on Apple Podcasts, and of course that was iTunes at one point, so if you don't know what that is, there you go. And man, the number of 5-star reviews that we have is almost embarrassing.
Yeah.
But it's great to hear these stories. So this person says, "Thank you for being honest, scientific, and joyful." Yeah. "Whenever I cave or crave, this podcast and the forum get me back on track. Sure, I've lost 60-ish pounds, but more importantly, my physical and mental health has improved. Being 38 years old with a 2-year-old and a daughter due any day, I know this lifestyle and podcast will give me years to enjoy my family." How cool is that?
Nice. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're definitely welcome. That's all I got. Short and sweet. What do you got?
I've got a dumpster fire that I started on Facebook.
Oh, no.
And it happened because there was an article in the news about how Australia was on target to eradicate the disease German measles or rubella.
Okay.
And in fact, I think we've removed all endemic infections of it from Australia.
Okay.
And I made the comment on Facebook, that this is what happens when you get herd immunity high enough. The virus cannot spread fast enough to sustain that type of rolling contagion that we used to have in the 90s.
Okay.
And it happens once a population goes above a certain threshold. Once people live in a dense enough environment, the distance from one person to the next means that the virus can spread very quickly. This is what herd immunity means.
Okay.
If enough people have immunity, then it just slows the virus fast enough for their immune system to be able to stop it.
Got it.
And it won't spread. And so, and there's a lot of people who think that herd immunity sounds like socialism, or it's all very well and good in theory, but it's not in practice. I remember when I went to university the first time around in the 80s, I was doing pure math, and one of the first assignments I had to do was to model the process of herd immunity. And, it was a computer model, and basically you set up, and you can see these online. I'll put a link to one of them, in the show notes, but you can try these simulators. You can basically say, look, I'm going to say that my virus has a 70% chance of spreading from one person to another, and I'm going to give my population a 30% chance of being immune to the virus. And then you just infect one, you click on one person in the population, and you watch to see whether the virus will spread or not. And if you have enough people have a minimum amount of immunity, then it slows the virus enough so that it doesn't sort of propagate through a community. And that's the thing with, this is the thing, not everybody can get a vaccination. The elderly, the people who are immunocompromised, children. So not everyone can get a vaccination. And so, but if they are surrounded with enough people who are vaccinated, there's a good chance that the infection won't get to them. So that's the theory. But of course, there's a lot of people in the ketogenic community who are also anti-vaxxers.
Right.
And one of the comments that I got was, seriously, you understand the propaganda surrounding LCHF, but you have no understanding of vaccine safety. So, it's really the argument is, if you're a conspiracy theorist about the whole calories in, calories out, then surely you must be a conspiracy theorist about vaccines. And that doesn't necessarily follow it. I think it's important. I really want to put a marker down here and say that it's important for diabetics, for type 2 diabetics for whom a ketogenic diet is a cure, or at least it's a reversal of their disease.
Right.
It's too important to be conflated with a lot of other, I don't really want to say fringe, but anti-vaxxing is a fringe. Fluoride is a fringe. Raw milk is a fringe. These are things that may turn out to be true, but the science is not there. Whereas the science behind a ketogenic diet has been there for 20 or 30 years, and it's only getting stronger. And so, it's one of these things that, the ketogenic diet is something that the orthodoxy would not agree with.
Yeah, and it's sort of understandable because of the nature of, how the ketogenic diet came about. You really have to flip conventional wisdom on its head. And so it does really appeal to those who, the anti-vaxxers and the people who think that conventional scientific advice is wrong, maybe across the board, maybe not across the board.
Contrarians.
But they're contrarians. Yeah, but it sort of fits the model that, everybody's stupid, don't listen to anybody. And that's just not the case. Like you said, it's based on science. And, when the anti-vaxxers come up with science to show that, yes, taking this vaccine or that vaccine can have harmful effects. And guess what? Some of them do, but it's not an across-the-board thing. You have to take every vaccine and every treatment on an individual basis. You can't lump them all into the same thing.
Yeah, and certainly don't conflate them with ketogenic diets because just because it's contrarian doesn't mean that it's not supported by science, which it is.
Yes.
We just have to wait for some dinosaurs in the Dietitians Association to move out of the way and let these young whippersnappers take control.
Totally agree. Just try not to lump everything into the same bucket and take every piece of science on its own merit. I think that's the piece of advice. Speaking
of science, we have an interview with a real scientist.
Yes, we do.
This man, I caught up with him at Low Carb Gold Coast, and this is Professor Stephen Finney, and he's the guy that invented nutritional ketosis.
Well, he invented the term. He coined the phrase.
But he was also the only researcher for many years.
That's right.
He was the only researcher. We talk about the science behind that supports a low-carb diet.
Right.
This man produced most of it. This man and Eric Westman, I think, and Jeff Volek.
Yeah.
These are... and there's a few others like Tom D'Agostino, but for the most part, Stephen Finney is the godfather, and he likes to be called the grandfather of nutritional ketosis.
Grandpa Keto. All right, let's roll the conversation.
I'm at Low Carb Down Under at the Gold Coast still, and this time my unique privilege is to speak to the godfather of nutritional ketosis, Professor Stephen Finney, who has come to Australia to speak at a series of conferences, and this is the last one before he heads back home. And I thought we might talk about the subject of satiety because for a supposedly weight loss diet, this is unique about nutritional ketosis, isn't it? That your diet is ad libitum. And I think it's one of all of the other diets seem to be, tricks and techniques to stop eating prior to satiety.
Yeah, it's a well-known observation among people who use or have tried themselves or practitioners who use a ketogenic diet that people seem to be able to lose weight more readily and for a longer duration of time than when employing a calorie-restricted diet, particularly one which is high enough in carbohydrates that it prevents nutritional ketosis.
Right.
And so there's multiple published studies with calorie-restricted diet, say 1,200 or 1,400 calories a day, which for the average heavy person induces a 1,000 calorie per day deficit.
Yeah.
That as the diet goes on, hunger and cravings increase.
Yeah.
And so there is essentially some termination point driven by physiological hunger.
Your ability to resist.
Yeah, it's sort of like resisting a slow, inexorable force. Eventually it gets the better of you and you abandon the diet.
No matter how stoic you are.
Yeah. Well, there are people who can do this for 6 months and lose a lot of weight.
Right.
It's rare that anybody goes beyond 6 months with a purposeful calorie restriction.
Yeah.
There's some of the calorie-restricted longevity advocates who can, on average, do this for years, but they're very rare.
Yeah.
They're very rare that people can do that.
Yeah.
So you have a crescendo of subtle, cravings and overt hunger symptoms that build over time.
Yeah.
And most people see the opposite for 6 months or longer with a well-formulated ketogenic diet. And many people experience this reduction in hunger and cravings. The appetite is there. A couple times a day they feel, a need to eat and are satiated, but it's rarely as compelling as what builds up as one follows a prolonged calorie-restricted non-ketogenic regimen.
Yeah. In fact, you actually use satiety as part of your signaling mechanism to determine how much energy somebody should take in, eat to satiety, fat to satiety. And there is a spontaneous recalibration over the period of weight loss where the body fat is producing less energy and the person tends to spontaneously eat a little bit more fat on their plate. And you're famous for the 4 charts where you show this recalibration effect.
But actually just kind of surfing on that a little bit in terms of internal regulation. There was some elegant research done in the 1950s, back when, post-World War II, there wasn't a whole lot of research money available. And there was a remarkable scientist in the UK named Professor John Garrow.
Okay.
And he had a country escape place, maybe in a village in the Scottish Highlands.
Right.
And there were about 300 people who lived in this village.
Mm-hmm.
And he would go there for a few weeks or a month every summer. I mean, whatever that 3-week window was of summer in Scotland.
Right.
And, it was just a place to go and get away from the city, from London.
Mm.
But since he was there, he'd bring along a scale. Mm-hmm. And he'd weigh everyone in the village.
Okay.
Year after year, he weighed everyone in the village.
And took their names, so he knew.
Yep.
Right.
And they all knew him, and he knew them. He was a crazy professor from London.
The man with the scale.
The man with the scale. And he would record their weight year after year. And, kids and adolescents gained weight. Women, when they were pregnant, gained weight.
Mm-hmm.
If, perhaps they retained a few pounds after each pregnancy. Mm-hmm. But for barring pregnancy and barring major illness or disease in the adults, their weights were remarkably stable for years and even decades at a time.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, the average adult eats somewhere between 750,000 and 1 million calories a year, and yet their bodies, a normal weight adult body will contain anywhere from 50 to 100,000 calories. So people were eating 10 to 20 times their weight in energy each year, and yet their weight was just staying stable within a few pounds.
Right.
And they weren't counting calories. Yeah. Nobody was saying eat this much or eat that much, which implies that we under unperturbed circumstances,
without derangement,
we as adults have internal instincts that let us get within 1%.
That's a remarkable
of our daily energy intake year in and year out.
That's a remarkable accuracy.
Yeah. And there are some people who are gaining persistently, but this is the 50s, and we didn't have a huge amount of sugar and highly refined carbs, and particularly in Scotland, you can't get fat eating haggis, So clearly, when you get even a carb-containing diet right, most people have homeostatic mechanisms that are very precise and are instinctive.
Yeah.
So what we seem to have discovered is that when we get people on a well-formulated ketogenic diet, we recreate those instinctive mechanisms, but not at the weight that you're at now, but by inducing nutritional ketosis, somehow that sets the new target for the body's homeostatic mechanism at a lower level.
Right.
People have called that the set point. And, I think we should call it a settling point, because it's settling because you can change it by changing diet composition.
Yeah.
But nutritional ketosis seems to induce a new settling point for people that may not be exactly where they want to be, but a lot lower than where they are in a insulin resistant, particularly with diabetes or metabolic syndrome disease state.
So how would you define a nutritionally ketogenic diet? Being that you came up with the term, you invented it, so you get to be the definitive definition. So
yes, and by the way, I prefer to be called the grandfather of nutritional ketosis, not the godfather.
Not the godfather. Okay, fair enough.
I don't take out contracts on people.
Fair enough.
Back in the late 1970s, when I initiated this line of research, all we physicians were taught were, that not having measurable ketones in your blood or in your urine was a good thing, and that ketones were a toxic byproduct of fat metabolism. And when we saw them, it was usually in the circumstance of either total starvation because someone had been stuck in a lifeboat without food, or that somebody was in ketoacidosis. And so we define nutritional ketosis as ketones in a range which had no threat to the body, and we now know actually has multiple, not just fuel benefits, but health signaling benefits. And so that's a range that begins at maybe 0.5 millimolar, seems to be more beneficial when one gets to 1 millimolar, and the range between 1 and 3 appears to be a good zone for fueling and signaling within the body. And people sometimes say, "Oh, your ketones are elevated into 1 to 3 range." I say, "No, they're in the 1 to 3 range.
Yeah.
That's not elevated. That's a normal physiological state for people when they're eating a diet that would reflect a traditional hunter or herder society's diet."
Yeah.
So one gets there by limiting carbohydrates. For most people, unless they're very physically active, under 50 grams per day. And for people who are insulin resistant, more in the 30 gram per day of total carb intake range. Keeping protein in moderation, because again, the more one increases protein above the required amount to maintain lean body mass, the rest of that protein is turned into carbohydrate and can influence ketone production.
Yeah. Protein really isn't a good energy source. It's like the third source of energy, I guess, if you don't include alcohol or sugar alcohols
Well,
or
in
exogenous
alcohol,
ketones.
then protein's a fourth energy source.
Okay.
Extra protein, there are no benefits and considerable downsides to overeating protein. And again, when we look at Aboriginal cultures where we have accurate measurements, and that means, where literate individuals could observe and write down what people were eating, were they the Maasai people in the Great Rift Valley, and there were some British researchers who lived among them when they were still following their original pastoral diet.
Right.
The Native Americans of the Great Plains, their lifestyle was recorded by a remarkable painter named George Catlin, who traveled among them in the 1830s because that was the time before the camera. He felt that he knew that they were going to be displaced from their ancestral lands, so he took paints and paintbrushes and canvases and went west of the Mississippi, and there are now still 250 of his paintings and 2 thick volumes of his writings that recorded the lifestyle of these people. And the ones who were nomadic and followed the buffalo, who didn't plant corn, beans, squash, lived on a almost totally carnivorous diet with some gathered foods, but very low in carbohydrate. And what we find from those 2 cultures, the Maasai, the buffalo people of the Great Plains, and the Inuit in the Arctic, is that they habitually ate a very moderate protein intake and a very high fat intake.
Yeah.
So it's not a high-fat diet.
Yeah.
So they somehow instinctively figured out that from a macronutrient maintenance intake, that about 15% of energy intake as protein appeared to be the right amount. But since the carb intake was so low, that put them in the 80% of energy as fat intake when they were maintaining their weight.
Yeah.
So it's very different than the high protein diet that many people assume that this is, and even the about twice that protein intake that is typically the target for the paleo approach to low carb nutrition.
Yeah, I know that Aboriginal Australians prioritise the tail of the kangaroo. And the kangaroo itself is really quite lean. Kangaroo meat's delicious, but when I cook with it, I always have to add extra fat. But the tail is where most of the fat is. And it's also convenient because it's a handle that you can carry as you're walking through the bush. And so you would see a family group walking, carrying this fatty kangaroo tail by the tail, and they'd toss the rest of the meat. The brains would go to the children as baby food. So they'd mash the brains up for baby food, and then the hunters would get the tail at priority, and then all of the lesser people in the family would get more lean and increasingly more lean meats. So they also used to hunt the turtles only in the season where the turtles were fattest. And so and this is, Australia is unique in that it's a continent that doesn't make a lot of carbohydrates. I think our most carbohydrate-laden grain is wattle seed, which is only 10% carbs, 10% starch. So, and also I think the only real sugars are from insects, honey ants and bees. And so there's not a lot of sugar here. So this is a population of people who couldn't live on a high carbohydrate diet. And as you say, they instinctively, possibly over 60,000 years, that instinct kicked in.
Sure.
They developed this eating practice, which, as you say, is it's mostly energy from fat.
Sure. Among the people who followed the buffalo in their seasonal migration, they in the fall, the time for their major hunting was in the fall, when the buffalo had built up subcutaneous fat for both energy reserve and insulation.
Yeah.
And some buffalo males would have a back hump, a hump of fat on the rear part of their back that would weigh up to 100 kilograms.
Wow.
A couple 100 pounds of fat. And you skin the buffalo, you take off this, literally you have 2 people carrying the saddle of fat. And of course they would save that. They'd dry the meat. They'd make something called pemmican. So they'd dry the meat, either sun dry it or smoke it to dry it, pound it into a soft fibrous mix, stuff it into a rawhide sack, and then pour in the rendered hot fat.
Right.
And you'd get this block of meat encased in fat. And of course, this is ruminant fat, so it's solid at room temperature, kind of like butter.
Yeah.
A little more higher in fat, or in saturated fat than butter content. And you could carry that sack with you for months, if not up to a year. And the energy density was such that if you're in camp not working hard, you could live on a pound of that pemmican per day.
That's incredible.
So they treasured the fat. But in the spring and early summer and late winter, when the fat amount was reduced, as you say, they would selectively consume the animals. And the treasured parts were the fat around the kidneys, the tongue. The tongue always had fat in it.
The tongue's quite fatty,
and the bone marrow. And you would find these piles of cracked buffalo long bones.
Yeah.
Smash them open with stones and scoop out the marrow. And of course, before they got the horse, they were dog people.
Yeah.
They lived for 10,000 years with dogs.
Right.
They only had horses for the last 300 years before they were sort of driven into reservations by people with guns.
Right.
But again, the dogs got the lean.
Yeah.
Because dogs can live on up to 50% of their energy intake coming from the protein component of food.
Yeah.
Whereas humans, if we go over 30%, we begin to get sick.
Yeah, I think it's I saw a paper that said that the process ureogenesis saturates at roughly 3.3 grams per kilogram of lean body mass intake. So that's really the cap, and above that, some people can make urea better than others, but above that, you start getting into the danger zone. I think that I remember you talking about rabbit starvation, mal de caribou in Arctic explorers. And that's really where you get this cap of amount of energy that you can get from protein.
Sure. Yeah, the Inuit knew that in the springtime, they had to find sources of fat. And so they would get out when they came. They would be out on the ice hunting seal. But once the ice broke up and until the caribou returned, it was a period of privation. And their weight would cycle with the availability of the hunt. But they also had early runs of fish, and there are certain fish, and certainly eels were a rich source. Real eels, interestingly, are about 25% by weight fat.
Really?
And so...
apparently Ansel Keys was a famous eel physiologist.
Oh.
I heard.
I did not know that.
No, apparently.
And a few times I met him, he didn't brag about that.
He didn't mention it. So I hear a lot of people talking about... I eat a lot of protein and I still make ketones. Are they necessarily on a ketogenic diet? I guess if they're making ketones, in theory, it's ketogenic, but it's not nutritional ketosis.
Yeah. If one is not eating any dietary carbohydrate, any visible carbohydrates from vegetable sources or grains, and one eats 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram reference body weight, one can still be in ketosis. Yeah. But the ketones are somewhat higher when you're at 1.5 grams per kilo. Yeah. So, someone can follow the current kind of concept of a carnivorous diet in the 2 to 3 gram per kilo protein intake range, right? And still have ketones. Again, the more insulin resistant a person is, the greater the tendency for them to be held down. Yeah. The more physical activity someone has, particularly endurance physical activity, that's a factor that helps bring ketones up somewhat. Right. But when we give in my study on bicycle racers that we published in 1983, we gave them 1.5 grams per kilo as meat and fat. Yeah. With no vegetable matter. Mm-hmm. And their ketones averaged about 2.5 millimolar. Yeah. But we didn't do a high protein range in that metabolic ward study to look at the effect of more or less doubling the protein intake. But the ketones would have been lower than that.
They would have been, yeah. And potentially zero. Potentially they'd...
Well, potentially, certainly under 0.5.
Yeah, okay. So one of my favorite studies of yours is the metabolic ward study where you had, I think it was 16 women, you locked in a metabolic ward and you fed them identical meals and you had half of them exercise and half of them not. And would you like to talk about that one? Because that was fascinating. That was counterintuitive. The results from that are counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it makes sense that the body's, prioritizing its energy intake, and if you're going to go exercise, do you want to talk about that?
Well, again, that was not a food diet. That was a formula weight loss diet.
Oh, okay.
Of about 800 calories per day. Mm-hmm. And it was a total of 12 women. Half of them remained sedentary. The other half we had add in exercise. We gave them the first week of the very low calorie diet. Mm-hmm. which had 30 grams of carbs per day.
Okay.
We gave them the first week of that diet to begin the adaptation process. And then we eased them into exercise by doing half an hour a day the second week of the study, an hour a day of exercise. And this was monitored on a stationary cycle. And then for the first week, none, half an hour per day the second week.
Right.
Third week, an hour a day. And then weeks 4 and 5, we had them do 2 hours a day. Now, this was at a very modest pace. This is 60% of peak aerobic power, which for them was, exercising at an energy expenditure of about 350 calories per hour.
Okay.
So they were burning about, at the 2 hours per day rate, that was about 700 calories per day, and that about equaled the amount of calories they were eating with this diet, which is 700 to 800 calories per day.
So in theory, they should have been a net zero.
And what I was pursuing was this concept that exercise counters the weight or the resting metabolic rate depression that comes with caloric restriction.
I see.
So the 6 women who did no exercise, no purposeful exercise other than
sat on the couch,
walking around the metabolic ward.
Yeah.
Those 6 women had a 10% reduction in resting metabolic rate that occurred in the first week, and then that reduction in metabolic rate was stable for the rest of the study.
Right.
So the body sensed immediately that it was in a privation condition, turned the thermostat down by 10%.
Yeah.
But as they got enough protein to preserve lean body mass, enough minerals to fill in the cracks between the protein and allow the body to maintain physiological functions, that 10% was a constant response to that degree of caloric restriction.
And insulin was low enough so that they could mobilize energy out of the fat stores and to mobilize it into mitochondria to be oxidized.
Yeah, the average woman in that study lost 6 kilograms in 6 weeks or in 5 weeks.
Yeah.
So that was and it was a variation between individuals. Some lost faster, some lost slower.
Yeah.
But what was fascinating is that the resting metabolic rate to the group that the 6 who did the exercise, as we added half an hour, 1 hour, and then 2 hours per week of exercise, again, they came down 10% the first week and they were doing no exercise, just like the control group. But then the added exercise caused a progressive further decrease in resting metabolism. So at the end of the 5 weeks of the intervention, the full effect of caloric restriction plus exercise was a 25% reduction in resting metabolism.
And no significant difference in weight loss.
There was no difference in weight loss.
Right. Yeah.
None.
So it's and that's remarkable, because you would think if you take 2 people and one person and they eat the same thing and one person exercises 1 to up to 2 hours on a treadmill, walking probably jogging at a reasonable pace on the treadmill.
We had them on a stationary cycle.
A stationary cycle.
Yeah.
But on a stationary cycle at a reasonable pace.
They were breathing but not huffing and puffing.
All right. Yeah. So that's what most of us would do at the gym if we're on a aerobic kick. And so you would expect that the person who spends 2 hours on a treadmill every day is going to lose more weight than the person who sits on the couch and does nothing but eats the same amount of food.
And these people found that these were not people who traditionally or habitually did a lot of exercise.
Yeah.
But what they found the 2 hours of exercise to be a lot of work.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But realize there's 24 hours in a day. They're spending 2 hours a day on the treadmill.
Yeah.
And tripling their rate of energy expenditure. But when for the other 22 hours a day, if their metabolic rate was reduced by an additional 15% at resting metabolic rate, you add it up, and that amount cancels out the exercise.
Yeah.
So the body had very accurately done the math.
Yeah.
And said, you're feeding me 700 or 800 calories a day, but then you're forcing me to do 700 or 800 calories a day of energy expenditure with exercise.
Yeah.
So this looks to me, my body saying, this looks to me like total starvation.
Yeah.
And we know from study after study of fasting, where people fast for 3 to 6 weeks, that there is a very dependable, on average, 25% reduction in resting metabolic rate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this just gets back to our energy homeostasis, gets us back to satiety, because it's all part of the same system. It's that we think that, intuitively we think that the person who did the more exercise should lose more weight, or the amount of calories that we eat minus the energy that that we calculate that we're using, if we mess with that ratio, we should be able to gain or lose weight. And it just shows that the body is a little bit smarter than that. Mm-hmm. Our energy output is linked to our energy intake. It's in mathematical terms, it's a complex function. So
I wouldn't just correct that. Okay. I wouldn't say smart. I would say that we have a highly evolved instinctive mechanism that we don't control intellectually.
Yes.
That regulates our energy balance. Mm. And when we undergo periods of privation, the body goes into conservation mode. Mm-hmm. And most people, when they're overfed, it increases their resting metabolism. But some people increase much more than others. There's some people who can overeat a lot and their metabolism speeds up and they'll burn that extra off. Other people, their body says, good, great, thanks, I'm going to put it in the bank account.
Yeah.
So, there's inter-individual variation to that response, but we all have highly evolved autonomous regulatory mechanisms.
Yeah.
And so, again, what we've learned to leverage is when we put people on a ketogenic diet, we take away the high insulin storage signal, or markedly reduce it, is we give the body permission to to increase its rate of fat oxidation.
Yeah.
And that rate of fat oxidation initially is not countered by fat hunger.
Right.
But again, we've come to see in ourselves when we try this on ourselves and predict for our patients that once they get to a new homeostatic level, there is a signal that as long as you don't eat carbs, that says eat more fat.
Yes.
And when we tell people about this, they say, "Oh yeah, that's happening to me." I open the refrigerator and the butter looks good.
Yeah.
Or I walk past the grocer's case.
Yes.
And I look at skim milk or non-fat yogurt and I say, ooh, but the high-fat yogurt or the full-fat cream and cheese looks good. Once you tell people that this could be occurring, and we're not planting a seed, we're just helping them see what is instinctively there driving their desire to eat.
Yeah.
That it appears the body can adjust what looks good to it to match its physiological needs.
Yeah, something in our environment perturbed us, it deranged us, and some people have said it's seed oils, high amounts of polyunsaturated oils in our diet, or trans fats, or carbohydrates, but whatever it is, whatever thing makes us go off the rails, we definitely go off the rails. I was 150 kilos, and when I went on a ketogenic diet, within about 5 months, I was 103 kilos was where I lighted, and I've gotten down to 101 various times, and I'm currently 106.
And that's been for how many years now?
It's 4 years.
Yeah.
And I eat to satiety. I eat ad libitum. I eat whatever I want as long as it's not carbs.
And in that interval of time, you've probably eaten, I'm guessing this is going to horrify you, 4 million calories.
Okay.
And yet your weight has varied 4 kilos.
Yes.
Which means 20,000 calories out of 4 million. You can do the...
Yeah, exactly.
And you haven't counted calories in that time period, I guess.
Not once.
Yeah.
I have measured what I ate sometimes because I do various N-of-1 experiments, as we all do. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit like I just turned down the thermostat, and then the AC and the heater did all of the job of regulating the room to the new normal. But that it was effortless. And what makes it a major epiphany for me, and what caused me to then become a podcaster and then go back to school to do biochemistry, was that I went for 20 years unable to control, knowing that I had to eat less or move more, unable to do either. And all of a sudden, I make a slight change. It's just a remarkable thing. So it is the hallmark of the ketogenic diet or nutritional ketosis. And you've actually shown experimentally and clinically with the Verta study, you work for a company called Verta. You're the chief medical officer, and with Sarah Hallberg, who's been on our podcast before, you've done an interesting experiment, haven't you? Would you like to talk about?
We've had the opportunity to do a fascinating experiment.
Yeah.
It's basically a proof of concept around some of the based on some of the prior shorter term research that Jeff Volek and I have done. In which we've taken previously people with metabolic syndrome, which is pre-diabetes, is associated, like diabetes, with underlying insulin resistance and inflammation.
Yeah.
And with a well-formulated ketogenic diet, we see a prompt, before major weight loss, a prompt reduction in insulin resistance and a prompt reduction in inflammation biomarkers.
Yeah.
And we do that with patients who have weight to lose without counting calories, just holding carbohydrates low enough and protein in moderation so they go into nutritional ketosis. People, without counting calories, lose quite a bit of weight. And typically it's in the 10 to 20% of their initial body weight.
I think for me it was 33%. So in the end, so
Yeah. Again,
maybe I'm an outlier.
well, I would say you have brought a unique perspective to this that probably enhances your ability to do this because of your desire to understand the process.
That's very true, probably. Yeah.
And so in the study that we did with Sarah Hallberg, when we started the company Virta Health, and we were looking for a proof of concept study to demonstrate not just that this works in the short term, but that we can put people on a well-formulated ketogenic diet, keep them on that diet, not by force, but by education.
Right.
And
they're willingly on it. They're invested in it.
Yes, help them perceive the biochemical benefits. You know, they test their ketones with a fingerstick blood ketone meter, but these are people with type 2 diabetes, and they're testing their glucose, and they're seeing values, their elevated values come down to the normal range.
Yeah.
Oftentimes quite promptly. They're getting off of medications that had unpleasant side effects and cost them considerable co-pays in terms of cost of medication. So there are real observed benefits. And then they're, of course, with diabetes, they're tracking this biomarker called hemoglobin A1C. And, for some of them had diabetes for a decade. The average person had diabetes for 6 years when we enrolled them in the study. And, for 6 years, their physicians had been, begging, cajoling, or even wagging their finger at them saying, you got to get this thing down. You got to eat less calories, move more, lose some weight. And of course, then they're giving them medications that make either insulin or sulfonylureas that make insulin go up, which counters the body's ability to burn fat.
Yeah.
And yet when people start seeing success, it's and they're empowered by that process.
It's before weight loss too, a lot of these things. So they're probably seeing glucose.
We reduce medicines by more than medications for diabetes by more than half, and almost all of that occurs in the first month or two.
Yeah.
And yet the weight loss goes on for 8 months.
Yeah.
The weight loss is, again, people are eating fat to satiety, protein in moderation, and carbs being restricted so that they keep their ketones up in the desirable range above 0.5 millimolar.
It's just the homeostasis.
They're not counting calories, and yet the weight loss isn't super fast. But
who cares?
We saw on average in this group of over 260 people with type 2 diabetes, the average weight loss was 12.5% at 8 months.
Wow.
And then it flattened out and stayed constant out to the end of the first year.
That was pretty much my experience. And then I maybe went up a very small, modest amount, maybe 10% of a retracement, but insignificant for, it's a satisfactory weight loss. Sure. If, I tell people this who hit a plateau all the time, just think, you're so many kilograms away from where you started, and you're complaining that you went up 1 or 2 kilograms, and that you can't lose that last 10 kilograms of fat that you'd like to use. But so far you've come.
And part of this we have to realize is that being in nutritional ketosis is not magically going to make people go back to where they were at a younger age at a much leaner level. So we can't, recreate the perfectly lean person people want to be.
Yeah.
So part of this is managing expectations. The average person who goes on a diet, on a carbohydrate calorie restricted diet, the majority don't lose more than 5% of their initial body weight.
Yeah. 10%
is a remarkable value. 12.5%. Yeah.
And it's not persistent either. They put it all back on.
If people are on a restricted diet, typically weight is regained within 1 to 2 years from the start of the diet.
Yeah.
And so, as you point out, we don't want to let, I guess the phrase is, we don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. And for, I think the statistic is fewer than 5% of people who undertake a weight loss diet, for health reasons, not just for vanity, but for health reasons.
Sure.
Fewer than 5% lose 30 pounds.
Wow.
The mean weight loss in our study, I think, was 34 pounds.
Yeah.
So
It's incredible.
the majority of people, if we were giving grades for this, they'd get an A or an A+ grade.
They sure would.
And we reverse diabetes in about half the people who start our program. For the people who stay in the program, and that's about 83% of the people stay in our program at the end of 1 year.
Yeah.
60% of them have put basically our diabetes back into a reversed state. We don't say remission. We obviously don't say cure, because if they go back to eating carbohydrates, that's going to come back.
Yeah.
The defense between the return of diabetes and their health is continuing to restrict carbohydrates to keep these, ancient little high potency molecules called ketones.
Yeah.
Working for them in their bloodstream.
Yeah.
And people can do, it's feasible to do this long term as long as people are adequately coached and guided and understand that the health benefits of sustaining the state of nutritional ketosis.
Yeah. How long have people done this for? How long have, obviously Inuit people have done this for 20,000 years maybe, but how long in the modern era, how long have people followed your nutritional ketogenic diet or a progenitor to yours? And do we have information about people who've done it for 10 years, 20 years?
We have anecdotes, but in terms of adults, we don't have that much experience with long-term use of ketogenic diets. Right. And from the late 1970s, when I started doing research in this, through about 2010, so over a 30-year period of time, I did not promote a long-term ketogenic diet. Right. Because I had not proven to my satisfaction that using modern foods, that it could really be safe. Yeah. I mean, we knew the Aboriginal cultures did this, but we destroyed those cultures before we studied them.
Yes.
I mean, we have some pretty good evidence around the Inuit, fairly good evidence in terms of the Maasai, but we don't have detailed records of what, if any, plant foods they ate. It is said that among the nomadic Native Americans who lived on the buffalo and followed the buffalo, it's said that the women tended to eat gathered foods, particularly during pregnancy. And you can make, there is a need for magnesium and potassium and phosphorus, and it may be more than you get from getting enough energy from a moderate protein intake. So we didn't know the safety factors. And of course, there's this tremendous fear of fat that we have. And the idea that you feed someone 70 or 80% of their daily energy intake as fat is horrifying to anybody with a basic or advanced nutrition education. And so I didn't want to advocate something we hadn't proven safe. So working with Jeff Volek from 2003 till 2010, we basically researched the fate of saturated fats that we're eating. And it turns out that when you become keto adapted, you double the body's ability to burn fat for energy. Right. Both at rest and during exercise. Yeah. In highly trained runners who eat a high carbohydrate diet, we found that the highest fat oxidation was less than 1 gram of fat per minute at their peak fat burning during exercise. Yeah. An identical person adapted to the ketogenic diet, not for a few weeks, but for 3 to 6 months or longer. Right. And it takes that long. That keto adapted runner can burn fat at 2 grams per minute. Wow. 1.7 grams per minute, as opposed to 0.7 or 0.8 grams per minute. Right. So it gets the
rewriting
body,
rewriting the books on physiology.
Yeah, it's the racing a 4-cylinder car against an 8-cylinder car, and for fat oxidation, a keto adapted individual is an 8-cylinder engine in terms of fat power, not 4-cylinder engine. Right. So they can use fat much faster, and it turns out that the primary fuels the body likes are saturated and monounsaturates, and the saturates don't build up, even though people eat a lot of them, because they're being burned for fuel on a real-time basis. The tank doesn't overflow with saturates when it's being tapped into as the body's energy, asleep, awake, running, walking, whatever.
I know there are some activists who say on a diet high in animal foods that those are necessarily high in saturated fat, that they are necessarily bad for cardiovascular health because a buildup of saturated fat is linked to an instance of cardiovascular disease.
Yes.
But potentially those people that doesn't necessarily mean what you're eating is what's building up.
Yeah. There's this old adage that you are what you eat, and that's incorrect. The correct way to state that is you are what you save from what you eat.
Right.
So the people who preach against saturated fat have it half right. That when you take a blood sample from someone and measure how much saturated fat there is in their blood, and then you follow them for a decade and see how many people develop diabetes, heart disease, or die of any cause.
Yeah.
The higher the saturated fat in the bloodstream, the greater the risk of diabetes, heart disease, and mortality. That's absolutely true. It's been shown in multiple studies in multiple countries. But because nutritional ketosis doubles the body's capacity for fat oxidation, it basically protects the body from that buildup. And so when we purposely feed people 3 times as much saturated fat per day on a ketogenic diet for 12 weeks versus a low-fat diet with 1/3 as much saturated fat in the diet, and we draw the blood samples, these are weight loss diets, eaten to satiety in terms of the ketogenic diet. The people on the ketogenic diet actually have lower levels of saturated fat in the blood, despite the fact they're eating 3 times as much. So it completely destroys this concept that you are what you eat. That you are you are what's left from
after you've used it for energy.
I eat 10 times my weight in energy each year, and what I have left is what my body's decided to save. And being on a ketogenic diet gives my body much more power to sift through those things and save the things it wants to save, and not be forced to save things that might do me damage.
Yeah, potentially the people who are eating a high carbohydrate diet are less able to metabolize saturated fats, and that's why they're hanging around.
In fact, for many of them, if they're insulin resistant, they can't burn the carbohydrates adequately, and that gets turned into saturated fat in the liver.
Right.
And so you actually not only block the body's ability to burn the saturated fats that are always there, but it forces the body to make more saturated fats.
Wow. Well, this has been a fascinating chat. Thank you very much for this. It's been a great pleasure. And I look forward to seeing the next study coming out of Verta, because I know you've got a 2-year study coming up, don't you?
Yes, we're in the process of writing up our 2-year data.
Excellent.
So we have it. We've analyzed it. The difficulty there is getting past the peer-reviewed process, which has not been friendly to this in the past, but we think there's movement now. In some journals, the editors are more willing to send their papers out to potentially favorable reviewers rather than sending them out to the ones who would dependably trash us for preaching heresy. So, Richard, it's been great talking to you as well.
Thank you.
And I hope within 6 months or so we'll have this data out. And in the study we're doing with Dr. Hallberg at Indiana University Health is now slated to go for a full 5 years.
Excellent. Well, 2 years is very important to me, because 2 years is used as the discriminator for long-term dietary adherence and long-term dietary outcomes. And if you can show outcomes after 2 years that show people are getting healthier, then nobody can ever say that a ketogenic diet is not adequate for long-term use.
Yes. And we're also monitoring other biomarkers such as lipoprotein, particle sizes, biomarkers of inflammation.
Great.
So we'll have a lot of information going forwards that will inform us in terms of how safe we feel this will be as a long-term strategy. And the safer it is, the more we can extend it out to less threatened segments of the population. But right now, we know people with diabetes have a marked increased risk of cancer and heart disease. And so any potential small increased risks that might be associated with some aspects of this diet are completely counterbalanced by the reversing all those risks of cardiovascular disease and cancer that are associated with diabetes.
Great. Thank you.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
Wow, it's so cool. And, there's nothing like science to show that satiety is what it's all about. And, if you stall, just keep calm and keto on, man.
Yeah, pretty much.
Eat to satiety.
It is. I mean, that's the thing that's unique about the ketogenic diet, really. It's satiety is a fuel signal that works if you get the derangement out of the way. It'll tell you when you need to get more energy and when you don't.
Exactly. Well, that was an awesome interview. Thank you for getting that.
You're welcome. So I think it's time for some recipes.
Man, I practically pegged it on that one.
Yeah.
You want to go first?
Carl's got a Valkyrie in his audio booth.
All right, so you go first, Bob.
Sure. Well, here's the problem. It's Carnivember. We don't have recipes for Carnivember. It's meat, salt, and water. It's not rocket surgery. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a trick for a snack in the fridge for when you're a bit peckish. Now, you know, if you're carnivore, you probably won't be peckish. But if you just have a craving for just something, a little something,
Right.
what I suggest doing is getting a tray, putting out some baking paper on that tray, parchment paper, and then laying bacon on it, and putting another piece of parchment paper on it, and putting another tray on top of it, and cooking it until that bacon is delicious. And what you want to do is, the reason for the tray on top is to make sure that the bacon stays perfectly flat. And then while the bacon is still warm, pull it off the tray. And I put it in a bowl in my fridge. And so I have a bacon bowl in the fridge with flat, perfectly cooked bacon. The good thing about cooking it in the tray is that you don't render a lot of the fat out.
That's right.
The fat is in situ.
It stays in it.
It stays in it. And so here's the trick is I have some Philadelphia cream cheese and I put a little smear of cream cheese on top of that bacon, and you know, you can put a little smear of Vegemite on if that's your particular fancy. Yeah.
It's a little bacon cream cheese sandwich.
It is. There you go. So that's my recipe. What do you got, Carl?
That's a great one. And I do remember way back when we started this podcast, that was one of the strategies for keeping in the, in the fridge, just a smear of cream cheese on a piece of bacon and you're good to go. Mm-hmm. So good.
There you go. Yep.
All right. Well, I don't have a Carnovember recipe because I just started yesterday. So this is the last non-carnivore thing that I made. Mm-hmm. And the recipe comes originally from resolutioneats.com. It's low carb banana cream pie, but I modified it just a little bit. So I'll tell you what I did. So it's banana cream pie without bananas. So you're relying on banana flavoring.
Okay.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's not the greatest, but you know, if you actually get that Jones for a bite of banana cream pie, it does the job.
It'll do you.
All right. So the filling, here's what you need. A 13.5 ounce can of full fat coconut cream. Now, I use coconut cream. This recipe calls for coconut milk. Yep. And the cream just has fewer carbs in it, right? Mm-hmm. It's thicker.
And more fat.
And more fat, right. 3 large egg yolks, half a cup of sweetener, and my sweetener du jour is allulose. Loving it, loving it. Mm-hmm. Yep. A teaspoon of xanthan gum. Mm-hmm. A teaspoon of vanilla extract, a teaspoon of banana extract, and 12 ounces of cream cheese that it's been softened. 12 ounces is 1.5 packages of Philly cream cheese.
Right.
Just so you know. And optionally, you can use some yellow food coloring if you want it to look yellow. It does look a little yellow from the egg yolks, but, you know, not as yellow as banana would look. So for the topping, it's basically whipping cream, 2 cups of whipping cream, but you're going to stiffen it up with gelatin. And so you basically melt an envelope of Knox or whatever, unflavored gelatin in a few teaspoons of water. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. You're also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla and 3 tablespoons of whatever sweetener du jour is, you know, that's measured to sugar.
Yeah.
All right. For the crust, they say use cooking spray. I don't like cooking spray because usually it has flour in it.
In Australia, you can get coconut oil in a cooking spray.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can find that, awesome. You can also get these pumps that you can put any kind of oil in, avocado oil, whatever. Yep. And that's what I use. So you want a half a cup of coconut flour, a cup of superfine almond flour, a third of a cup of ground flaxseed meal. And this was good. I actually used the flaxseed meal, and it's good because it gives it a little nutty flavor that I like. Now, the original recipe calls for a third of a cup of unflavored or vanilla whey protein powder, and I just omitted that.
Yeah.
I added a little more almond flour. 2 tablespoons of your favorite sweetener, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. I added a little bit more because I like that salty crust on a banana cream pie. It stands up nicely against the sweet. And a half a cup of melted butter, which is 1 stick. All right. So, I mean, pretty much if you ever cooked a pie, you know what to do here. But for the filling, first you separate the egg yolks. You beat the yolks a little bit and heat the coconut milk in a little saucepan over medium heat You want it to be hot but not boiling. So if it boils, take it off the heat and wait for a minute or two. And you're only going to take 1/4 of the cup of that coconut cream and mix that into the eggs slowly to temper them. And then you add that to the rest of the coconut cream and you lower the heat, so on low heat. And now you mix the sweetener and the xanthan gum together in a small bowl, and you sprinkle that over the coconut milk mixture, coconut cream, and mix that in. And you want to cook that for 3 or 4 minutes until it thickens up.
Yeah, until it sets. Yep.
Yep. Now you remove that from the heat and stir in the banana and vanilla extracts.
Mm-hmm.
And you add that to a medium-sized bowl, so take it off the heat and cover it with plastic wrap. Or you can put it in a Tupperware and chill it in the fridge for at least 2 hours. That's really important. You got to chill it. It's got to be cold all the way through. So now, while that's chilling, you make the crust. So you preheat the oven to 350 Fahrenheit, and you put your cooking spray or whatever it is on a pie pan. And you mix the dry ingredients together, and you add in the melted butter, and you just mix it up with your hands, and it crumbles. And now you just take that and press it into the pie pan with your fingers, evenly distributed. And you want that to run up on the sides and around the little crimpy things. That's a technical term, crimpy things.
Technical term, chefy term. Yep.
It's a very chefy term, yeah. And you want to dock it. So you take a fork and you poke some holes in the bottom of the crust.
That just stops bubbles from appearing.
Yeah, exactly. Now you only bake it for 10 minutes, and that's enough to brown it around the edges. You know, you can go a little bit further, but you really don't want the crust to be so cooked that it just, burns, right? You don't want it to really brown up.
No, I've got these little ceramic pie weights that are really good for keeping the pie down. You just you crumple up some parchment paper, put it in the middle of the pie, and then put the weights on top of that, and that just keeps bubbles from appearing. And it also tends to stop the pie crust from burning, which is another thing.
Yeah, that's a good point. There isn't any baking powder in here, so it's not going to rise.
Right.
But if you want to take some marbles or some ceramic beads or anything like that and put them in the bottom, that's a classic technique for making pie crust. Yep. All right, so now you're going to dissolve the gelatin. So what you do is you take a tablespoon of cold water in a small bowl and you sprinkle the gelatin on the top, and you let that sit for 2 minutes, and that sort of just softens the gelatin. And then you stir in a tablespoon of boiling water, and you stir it all until it's all dissolved. And it's going to be kind of thick, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So now you use a mixer and you whip the heavy cream. We've talked about whipping cream before, but what I like to do is take a metal bowl and put it in the freezer for a minute or two.
Yeah.
And it gets it really cold. You need that. And then you basically bring it to soft peaks, and you add in a teaspoon of vanilla extract, 3 tablespoons of sweetener. And then you slowly pour the gelatin mixture in and, scrape it down.
Right.
And get all that stuff in there. Now you beat it up until it's stiff peaks, but not until it's butter. You don't want to do that.
No, you don't want butter. If you have butter, you got to start from scratch again.
Yep. So now, in a large bowl, another bowl, you take the cream cheese and beat that until light and fluffy, and it should be softened. It should be sitting out, have been sitting out of the fridge for an hour or so.
Sure.
And now you slowly beat in the chilled pudding, the banana pudding, a little at a time. And if you want your food coloring, you put that in there afterwards. Now, the whipped cream, you're going to take half of it and fold that into the cream cheese pudding mixture. And if you've ever folded egg whites, it's the same technique. You don't want to mix it. You don't want to stir it. You don't want to flatten the whipped cream. You want to just fold it over, turn, fold it over, turn.
Yeah.
And now you basically put the filling into the cooled crust, and the remaining whipped cream goes on top, and you want to chill that in the fridge for at least 3 hours because you want the whole thing to set up. And man, it's, if you haven't had banana cream pie in years like I haven't, it's a welcome taste.
Yeah. I tell you what might be useful there is doing it in muffin tins. Do like a dozen muffin tins and do little muffins. And then just put a disc of the crust on the bottom, and then so just to portion it into smaller portions as well. So
that's right.
Nice. That sounds delicious. Sounds like a lot of hard work for a banana cream pie.
It's a lot of work, but, if you have family members who really want that, sweet experience.
Thanksgiving's coming up.
Yep.
Yeah. You want to put a little bit of effort into Thanksgiving, people? Come on, seriously. Get at it.
There you go. Oh, and by the way, Thanksgiving is coming up, and we have a whole series of Thanksgiving recipes on our blog, which we'll put in the show notes.
We do.
And that's it.
That sounds awesome, mate.
Yeah, very good. And that's a good show.
Yeah. Of course, if you have anything you want to tell us, something we said wrong, something you don't agree with, some more research that you found to support or refute, anything that we've said, send it by email to dudes@2ketodudes.com or post it on our website.
And you can follow us on Twitter, Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at 2ketodudes. Make sure to use the hashtag 2ketodudes.
And of course, if you want to join the free ketogenic forum, it's forum.2keto.com. And you can have a look around the ketogenic forum without needing to create an account by starting with success.2keto.com.
Right. And if useless swag is your fancy t-shirts, coffee mugs, and all that other junk, head over to gear.2keto.com.
And if you want a shot at getting some of that swag for free, join the 2Keto Dudes fan club. You'll be eligible to win something in every show. Go to fanclub.2keto.com.
And if you feel like supporting our forums and all the podcasts we produce and everything else that we do here, think about making a monthly pledge on our Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com.
And all of our stuff is listener supported. You can see all of our podcasts and other videos on YouTube at youtube.2keto.com.
And if you haven't already, go leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That's how new people get to know about what we do. 2 Keto Dudes is brought to you by 2 Keto LLC, who strives to support the low-carb community with podcasts and other publications. And now it's time for the wise saying, keep calm, keto on, and fast when you can.
Yeah, keep calm, keto on, Carl, and Keto Fest, at least once a year.
And carnivore on, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll see you next time
on 2 Keto Dudes.